Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm Wendy Nather, and the first thing I want to do in this presentation is talk about why I don't like benchmarks. I don't like going to other peers and saying, what are you doing in security? I don't know, what are you doing? Because what if your peers are not good at security? What if their idea of security is making burnt toast sacrifices to the cloud or something like that? Are you going to do that too? I don't think so. We want to know what works in security, what actually works. And when it comes to data-driven research, that's why I pulled in my good friend, Dr. Wade Baker. Say hi, Wade.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much, Wendy, for pulling me into this. It's been fun.
It has been fun. Now we'll talk about the research that we actually did. What we did was, first of all, we talked about, we talked to 4,800 IT and security pros around the world. After we surveyed them, we narrowed down the responses we were going to look at to about 150 well-qualified actual security people responses. But we took them from all types of organizations, from 25 countries, and we asked them about 11 program outcomes, things that you would want to get from your security program. And we also asked them about 25 security practices that they might or might not be doing. Well, we categorized these different outcomes into three categories: enabling the business, managing the risk, and operating efficiencies. So you can see all 11 outcomes here. They're everything from getting executive confidence to minimizing unplanned work. We all want to do that, right? And recruiting and retaining security talent. These are the 11 that we got from CISOs, and we asked everybody about them. Then we also asked them about 25 security practices. This isn't all of them on the slide. This is just a representative sample. But again, under three categories like business and governance and architecture and operations. What you want to do is get things like clear reporting. You want IR and recovery streamlined. You want to make good use of automation. All of those practices, we asked them whether they were doing them successfully or not. And we wanted to find out, does anything matter in security? This is our Metallica slide. Nothing else matters. Does anything matter at all? And Wade will talk about what happened.
We need some music in the background there.
That's right.
So the important thing about this, like Wendy said, we have 25 security practices and 11 outcomes. What we did not do is say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Survey respondent, do you think this practice achieves this outcome, right? We weren't seeking opinions on what people think matters in security. We took all of their responses about how well they're doing in those 25 practices and how well they're achieving those 11 outcomes. And we crunched all the data using some advanced multivariate statistics. And the idea was to find patterns in the data where the data tells us, hey, this practice and this outcome are correlated, have some kind of relationship. And this graphic that you see here turns out to be a nicely formatted grid. And that's actually one of the ways that we visualized it in the report. If you go to the security outcomes study, download the report, or look on the page where the report is hosted, you'll see this image here. And along the bottom, you have the 25 practices. Along the y-axis there are the 11 outcomes. And anywhere that you see something other than white, it is saying that that practice correlates significantly with success in that outcome. So I'm going to take the top left corner just as an example. So organizations that told us they had a really good proactive approach to tech refresh were 8.9% more likely to report that their organizations were successfully keeping up with the business. And every single other thing on this slide can be read like that. And so, if we take a step back here and use this as a way to see a data-driven approach to, hey, we see good evidence that these practices actually do increase the likelihood of achieving these certain outcomes. There's a lot we can learn from this. I know this is dense. You don't have to read everything. You can see all of this after the talk and go through it in detail. But for now, I want to do 3 very high-level observations that we took from this. 23 of those 25 practices were linked to improving the chance of success in at least one outcome. I'm glad for that, right? There's not a lot we're doing that's just ineffective and not accomplishing anything at all. So that's something to consider and remember. Second, 11 out of the 11 outcomes benefited from at least 9 practices. In other words, if you want to achieve an outcome like keeping up with the business that I read out earlier, you have at least 9 different ways to go about doing that. Not that any one of those things is going to magically unlock success, but at least 9 different things statistically significantly contribute to that outcome. And again, that's good news. And then furthermore, if you look at all of that entire grid, 45% of those practice and outcome intersections have a significant correlation. And that's good. Of course, that means that 55% are white space or do not. And you could interpret that as less than half of what we do in Security Matters. But Wendy and I prefer the more glasses half full interpretation of that and say what we do in security matters. There is good evidence here that these standard practices, all of which, by the way, are pretty general, nothing gets super, super, super detailed, but the things that we generally believe in security do actually achieve the outcomes that people tell us that they want to achieve. And I was very refreshed by that, actually. How about you, Wendy?
Yes, very much so. Thank goodness. Now, I'm sure you all want to know what matters most overall. And this is where it gets kind of interesting. Hold on to your hats. Ready? Here we go. The top 5 practices that were most correlated across the board with successful outcomes included, number 1, having a proactive tech refresh strategy. And then the second one was having well-integrated technology. And this led us to conclude in our report that according to these statistics, the organizations wanting to maximize their overall success of their security program should ideally start with a modern, well-integrated tech stack. Now, I know what you're thinking. I do. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, did Cisco influence these findings? Because yes, I work for a vendor and we want to sell stuff. And I'm here to say that no, we did not influence these findings, not even with Jedi mind tricks. Wade, can you back me up here?
I back you up 100%, Wendy. And the Scientia Institute did the analysis for this. And so if there is a bias or any kind of error in these results, it's our fault. And Cisco actually brought this to our attention. Gee, this doesn't exactly look, like we're being truthful here, but it's totally legit. Those were, per the data, the strongest correlations.
Yes, and the study, by the way, was double-blinded. They didn't know who was asking the questions. We didn't know who was answering. So there you have it. Now, as soon as I saw those results, though, my first thought was, what is this going to do for organizations that can't afford to update their stack all the time or to integrate it? What about those people? And that's a really interesting and difficult question. But there are different ways, different options for getting something like that. Now, of course, the first one is upgrading to the best available hardware and software. Nice if you can do it, if you've got a huge budget and you've got the flexibility to do that, that's nice. But another option you could try is migrating to SaaS and cloud-based services, because at least your provider is responsible for updating that part of your tech stack. So at least you don't have to try to do it inside of your organization. Moving to built-in security is another option. The good thing about security technology is, as it's been evolving, a lot of these technologies are getting more security built in. We're seeing that more and more with operating systems and so on. So you're automatically getting some advantage just by updating what you have right now. And then if you want to get really bleeding cutting edge, you want to get all fancy, you want to try adopting something like Sunil Yu's DIE model, where he includes ephemeral architectures in there. I hope you're going to hear Sunil Yu and Josh Corman's talk at the conference. You can try something like that to see if ephemerality will help you with updating and upgrading. So those are some options to think about. Now let's look at the other three in the top 5. The other 3 that are most correlated are timely incident response, prompt disaster recovery, and accurate threat detection, which, if you'll notice, don't necessarily have anything to do with technology. In fact, if you look at Sunil Yu's cyber defense matrix, these are all right of boom, as he describes them. These are all, after the breach happens, these practices are good things for you to be practicing in terms of your process and your people anyway. Wade, you got comments on this one too?
I do. And specifically, you know, if you hear detection, response, recovery, you might start thinking of the NIST cybersecurity framework because it uses that same language. And I think it prompted us to wonder, oh, well, you know, what does that look like? Is there any connection there? So we actually asked respondents and grouped the practices according to where they fit, what category they're in the identify, protect, detect, respond, recover that the NIST cybersecurity framework is built around. And if you're familiar with that, that's the order of them. It's not saying that identify is more important than recover. It's just saying that that's typically where you start. You identify a threat and protect against it before you can detect, respond, and recover to it. So there's a little bit of a timeliness built into that. But we were more interested in what does the data say about the correlation of any of those categories to overall success. In other words, is identify more important than recover, vice versa. So on the second column there, where under the data heading, this is in crunching the data, what we found to be the ordering of importance in terms of driving program success. And the most notable thing here for us is that protect is at the bottom. You know, it is the least correlated with building a successful program. Now, we were careful to, throw up a caveat that we do not see this as saying that protect isn't important. In other words, oh, rip out all your protect and prevent-based technologies and you'll have a successful program. We see this as more indicative of the fact that we need to build more diverse programs. For a long time in security, we were very, very protect heavy. We relied on that most of all, but now detection, response, and recovery are at least equally important, right? And this is good evidence that that is in fact the case, that those things are driving and really critical to success in addition to protection. So I think it's probably a good time to look at the next set and ask the question, what comes after those top 5? And we thought this was important to throw up on the screen here, because if you look at these, they kind of take on a different characteristic. We have metrics. Automation, I think, would slide very easily into the detection, respond, recovery phase. But developing a sound strategy, having a sufficient budget for all of these things, and then role-based training. These, if I had to put a label on these, I think I'd put governance, right? And I think it's a good reminder that successful programs, we saw architecture is extremely important to successful programs. I think when we look at the detection, respond, and recovery, process and technologies and those kinds of things are important. And this tells me that governance and people and money and strategy is important as well. So we're not going to achieve success in security just by buying good tech or just by hiring good people. The data really is suggesting that all of these things work together to get us where we need to be.
Right.
So that brings up the question, what matters least overall? I think this may be the most important question, because a lot of people say, yeah, I want to know what works, but I also want to know what doesn't work, because I need to consider whether or not we should be investing as heavily there. And there were several surprises. Wendy, we probably talked more about these than the ones on top, I feel like.
Yeah, this is kind of the womp, womp, womp slide.
So there's some stuff on here that might surprise you. Identifying top cyber risk, as number 21, secure development, someone being in charge of compliance, understanding security in the business, and then security measures being reviewed. Now, if you put these in front of me and said, hey, Wade, are these unimportant in building a security program? There's not a single one of those that I would say, oh, nope, that's not important. And they're in here. They're among the 25 practices because we thought they were important. But, as far as the data says, some of these were correlated with not a single one of the outcomes that we measured. And then others are just one or two of those outcomes. So not as effective overall. But there's a caveat here that I think is important to mention. And that is numbers 1 through 25, and just in general, the things that matter most in security change based on organization size, the industry, the geography that organization is in. We saw a lot of variation across these things, so that just because it's number 1 overall doesn't mean it's going to be number 1 for you. And to highlight that point, this chart is looking at different size groupings. So small and medium business, large, and then large enterprise at the bottom. And just look at the last row. What you're looking at here is how things changed. These practices changed in terms of driving overall success from the overall set of respondents to just those in enterprise. And here's that identifying top cyber risks, which is at 0% because it was not significantly correlated with program success in the overall data set, but it was one of the key differentiators for enterprise security programs and really unlocked and became very important in terms of achieving success for those really large organizations. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that. Larger organizations have more threats. It gets more complex to manage against them, and it becomes therefore more important to really know what you're defending against, is my hypothesis of why that might be. But the important thing to remember here is that I hate to say it, but everything we're telling you kind of changes a little bit depending on who you are and where you're doing business and those kinds of things. But at least we have some evidence to base some good decisions on here.
Yep. Now, which practices offer the biggest bang for the buck? I know everybody's waiting for that. And I've got some bad news. In this chart, you can see across the bottom the percentage of respondents who said that they were doing a particular practice. And on the left side, along the y-axis, you can see the increase in probability of overall program success. Now, you notice there's nothing in the upper right quadrant. I'm sorry. There just isn't anything that's so magical that everybody said that they could do it, and it gave a very high probability of giving you success in your outcomes across the board. If there were, we'd probably already be doing it. So that's kind of sad. But anyway, if you look at all the black dots here, these are the practices that were statistically significant. And not everybody said that they could do them. Clear reporting to exec seems to be the highest one. But this is another great illustration of by how far and away the proactive tech refresh and the well-integrated tech stood out in their impact on overall program success compared to everything else. Again, this was really surprising to us. Now, don't feel bad if you're looking at the light blue practices. These are the ones that were not in and of themselves statistically significant across the board. But Several of them are statistically significant, again, based on who you are, what your organization is, the size and so on. But also, if you took a bunch of these and put them all together, I bet that they would end up being statistically significant together. So don't feel too bad about this. There's no one quick win, but we still have a lot of indications of what we can be doing. Now, what should you be doing with these findings besides having a drink first? Go ahead, Wade.
So we tried very hard to make this report, a roadmap for helping you find your way in building a successful security program. So if you, our first recommendation is to grab the report, and in that report, you'll find this thing that we call the Security Outcomes Matrix. I showed you a version of that earlier, and here you see it again. And I just want to take a minute here and kind of tell you how to read it. We started affectionately calling this the Choose Your Own Security Adventure as we were developing this, and there's a reason for that. It brings back good memories of those fun books, but this is exactly the way that works. In other words, if you are on a route to a program that keeps up with the business, right? You take that row and you scan across this matrix, and you've got about a dozen different practices that overall are statistically significant in helping you get there, right? These are the things where you can choose that one and the book progresses and you go to the next step, and that's good. And you can do that for all of these, right? We do not expect every single program keeping up with the business is the number one thing they're trying to achieve. It might be meeting compliance regulations for another organization or minimizing unplanned work. So we wanted this to be your tool for achieving what you need to achieve for your program. And then there's additionally, you don't have to read it horizontally. You can read it vertically as well. In other words, if you have been investing in a particular practice, I'm just going to pick one, security awareness training, right? It's kind of middle of the pack over to the right a little bit, and you scan up that. There's 3 different outcomes that the data says that practice will increase your chances of success in. And so both of these ways are valid to methods of putting this data to use for you. And we want it to be that way. You'll find an interactive version of this chart on the report website. There you see the URL, and you can kind of mouse over some of the outcomes and practices and just have fun with it, right? That's why it's there. So after you get bored of doing that, we recommend that you check out some of the regional, industry, and size-based derivative reports that have been created around this. So keep in mind that we mentioned a while ago that that grid is going to look different if you're a very small organization versus a very large organization. And therefore, we've tried to highlight some of those differences for you in some follow-up research that has been published after that report. Again, you'll find a lot of those on that same page when you go to the URL on the previous slide. So just if there's one for your industry or your size, check it out. Read that, and you'll find a whole host of things that matter for your organization in particular. And then furthermore, we have had a bunch of feedback since publishing this report from security leaders that are saying, hey, those 11 outcomes, they're really quite useful. You know, I read this report and I started seeing how we could think about our own program in light of those 11 outcomes and how we might achieve and report on those and things like that. And so our last recommendation here is to look at those 11 outcomes and ask, how can you measure them? You know, how could you assess your own progress toward those objectives? And what kind of metrics would let you know where you are along that path? And if you look in the appendix of the study, you will find at least some prompter things about organizations, how you might know if you're struggling or succeeding in those outcomes. But we really view these as a way to build an overall successful program. And we hope that this talk, this report, and everything that has happened around it helps you get there. Thank you very much for listening to us today. Thoroughly have enjoyed this research, and thank you.
Yes, thank you. And please reach out to us if you have questions and suggestions for further research. Our information is right here. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of the conference.